In the face of Chow, when the odds are stacked against them, heroes rise. Welcome to Twist Effect Stories, where every heartbeat, every bullet, and every impossible decision could be the difference between life and death. We bring you the real stories of courage, survival, and fate-defying moments that will leave you questioning what's truly possible. Subscribe now and prepare for the twist. The air at Fort Ridge Air Base was crisp that morning, with the pale gold of sunrise casting long shadows across the tarmac. Mechanics moved between aircraft like ants working on a great machine, wrenches clinking and boots thudding in rhythm. Inside the main operations building, the morning briefing room was already buzzing, screens flickering with tactical maps and radar sweeps. And the sound of pilots trading jokes filled the air like an exclusive club, one that Emma Carter had been invisible to for 3 long years. Emma, 28 years old, walked in at exactly 600 hours, her brown hair tied neatly in a low ponytail, green eyes sharp enough to notice every detail without revealing much of her own thoughts. In her hands, she carried the usual tray of steaming coffees, one for each pilot in the squadron, along with a box of glazed donuts. She moved quietly between the tables, placing cups down without interrupting the easy banter around her. To them, she was background noise, the civilian assistant who filed reports, answered phones, and kept the briefing room stocked with caffeine. They barely registered her presence. Yet she knew the rhythm of this place better than most. She could read the way a mission was going just from the tone in the pilots' voices or the tension in the commanding officer's jaw. Her father, Colonel Michael Carter, had been a legend in the skies, a decorated F-22 Raptor pilot with a reputation for both precision and daring. Before his death during a classified mission overseas, he had spent years training Emma on everything from aerodynamics to complex combat maneuvers. Most children spent weekends at parks or malls. Emma had spent hers at private airfields, learning to fly Cessnas before she was tall enough to reach the pedals, and later slipping into the cockpits of military trainers under her father's watchful eye. Despite her experience, when she applied to the Air Force pilot program after college, politics and her father's mysterious final mission barred her from even being considered. Instead, she had taken the only position available, working administrative support for the very pilots she could outfly. That morning, General Robert Hayes stood at the front of the room, silver hair neat under his cap, his chest heavy with medals earned over decades. Hayes commanded the 421st Fighter Squadron with the confidence of a man certain the skies belonged to him. His view of the world was carved in stone. Fighter aviation was a man's domain, and he had made no effort to hide his opinion that women were better suited for desk jobs than cockpits. Emma set his coffee on the edge of the podium without a word. Hayes didn't look up, instead continuing his rundown of the day's scheduled training exercise. 6 F-22 Raptors would simulate defense against incoming enemy aircraft, an aerial chess match with speed and firepower. The pilots listened with relaxed grins, tossing easy remarks to each other. Captain Lewis commented on the perfect flying weather. Lieutenant Parker chuckled about how the Navy's F divided by -18s wouldn't stand a chance. Emma collected empty cups, pretending not to hear, but she was absorbing every word, noting flight paths, altitudes, and the timing of each intercept. Her father had taught her to always listen, always think like a pilot, even if the world refused to see you as one. At 1000 hours, the training would begin. At least that was the plan. No one in that room yet knew the day would end with every single person on the base seeing Emma Carter in a way they never had before. The first hint of change came not from the briefing, but from the sudden wail of the base alarm, a shrill rising sound that turned the casual chatter into tense silence. Red lights flashed along the walls, and the base commander's voice thundered through the intercom. All personnel, this is not a drill. Multiple unidentified aircraft approaching from the southeast, estimated arrival in 15 minutes. All available pilots to aircraft immediately. The room erupted into motion, chairs scraping back, flight suits grabbed, helmets clutched under arms. Emma stepped aside as the men rushed past. Through the briefing room windows, she saw ground crews already racing toward the jets, fueling, arming, and preparing them for combat. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, Several of the pilots faltered. Captain Lewis staggered and collapsed. Clutching his stomach, Lieutenant Parker barely made it to the hangar doors before doubling over in pain. Reports spread quickly. Food poisoning from the same off-base restaurant they had eaten at the night before. Within minutes, the squadron was down to only 3 available pilots for 6 combat-ready F-22s. General Hayes barked orders, his voice louder but not steadier. They needed at least 5 jets in the air to cover the multiple approach angles of the incoming aircraft. The tactical display showed the enemy closing in, red blips growing nearer with each sweep of the radar. "Where are we supposed to find more pilots?" Hayes demanded. "We can't just pull someone off the street, and women can't fly fighter jets. This isn't some arcade game." The room went still. Emma stood in the corner, the coffee pot still in her hands, watching the most powerful officer on the base face a reality he had never considered. And it was in that moment, with the clock ticking down and the base in danger, that Emma Carter decided she was done blending into the background. Emma set the coffee pot down on the nearest table, her movements calm and deliberate while the rest of the room was a storm of urgent voices and rushing footsteps. She stepped forward through the cluster of officers and technicians until she stood at the edge of the tactical display where General Hayes was leaning over the glowing map of the Nevada desert. "General," she said evenly, "I can fly." He turned to her with a look that was half disbelief, half irritation, as though she had just suggested the squadron take bicycles in a battle. The corners of his mouth tightened. "I said I can fly the Raptor," she continued, her voice steady. "I am qualified." The reaction in the room was immediate, a mix of muffled laughs, raised eyebrows, and muttered remarks. Even now, with enemy aircraft minutes away from penetrating one of the most secure airspaces in the country, the idea of the coffee girl sitting in the cockpit of the Air Force's most advanced fighter was unthinkable to them. General Hayes shook his head slowly. "Emma, this is not some flight simulator on a computer. These are real machines worth more than most small towns. They demand years of training." "Colonel Michael Carter was my father," Emma said, cutting him off, her tone sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Call sign Falcon. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, 47 confirmed air-to-air kills. He taught me everything he knew, from the first time I sat in the co-pilot seat at age 10 to my last flight in a trainer at 23. I have over 800 hours logged in military aircraft, including time in the Raptor." The room went silent. A few of the older crew members exchanged glances, recognition flickering in their eyes. Master Sergeant Clark, the flight line chief, stepped forward. "Falcon Carter was a legend. If she's his daughter and she's telling the truth about her flight hours, sir, we might want to think twice before dismissing her." Hayes scowled at Clark. "She's a civilian," he said. "She makes coffee and files reports. I'm not risking national defense on someone who hasn't worn the uniform." Radar operator's voice cut in from the corner. "Bogey's now at 10 miles out, descending through 30,000 feet. General, if we're going to launch more Raptors, we need to do it right now." Emma stepped past Hayes, walking to the equipment locker without hesitation. She began pulling on a flight suit, each motion smooth and certain, her fingers closing zippers and buckles in the same rhythm she had practiced hundreds of times under her father's watch. "General, you can either let your pride decide the outcome today, or you can let me prove what I can do," she said without looking up. "If you choose the first, you'd better be ready to explain to Washington why this base fell under your command." The air seemed to tighten. Hayes stood rigid, his eyes locked on her, torn between everything he had been taught and the reality that his options were dwindling with each passing second. "I could have you thrown off this base for even trying this," he muttered. "You could," Emma replied, fitting the helmet under her arm, "but in 7 minutes those enemy aircraft will be over our heads, and you'll have 3 pilots against however many are out there. Your choice." Clark didn't wait for an answer, "Ma'am. You'll take aircraft number 074143. She's fueled, armed, and ready. Your call sign will be Sky Ghost for this mission." Emma strode toward the hangar doors, the weight of the helmet in her hands somehow lighter than it had ever felt. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, disbelief, doubt, curiosity, some even laced with a flicker of hope. The Raptor waited in the bright sun like a silver predator, its sleek lines catching the light as though it had been carved from the air itself. Emma climbed the ladder with quick, practice steps, settling into the cockpit as naturally as if she had never left it. Her hands moved instinctively over the controls, switches flicking in precise sequence. Master power on, engine starting, avionics online, she murmured into the comms. The twin engines roared to life, a sound that seemed to vibrate through her bones. On the tower's frequency, the air traffic controller's voice came through, Sky Ghost requesting immediate takeoff clearance. General Hayes's voice followed, tight but resigned. Sky Ghost, this is Tower, cleared for immediate takeoff. May God help us all. Emma eased the throttle forward, the jet rolling onto the runway with the grace of a predator moving into position. Her father's voice was there in her memory, steady and sure. When the time comes, you don't hesitate, you don't ask for permission, you just fly. She pushed the throttle to full military power. The Raptor surged forward, wind pressing against the canopy, speed climbing 180 knots, stick back. The nose lifted, and the ground fell away beneath her. The base shrank into a cluster of buildings and runways as the jet climbed toward the sky, the sun flashing off its wings. Sky Ghost to all aircraft, she said into the mic, climbing to 40,000 feet, heading southeast to intercept. Let's make sure these intruders regret crossing this line. Her radar lit up with 6 approaching contacts, their formations tight, their speed aggressive, and in that instant Emma knew. This was no training exercise. At 40,000 feet the air was thin and sharp. The earth far below looked like a patchwork of desert sand and scattered ridges. The radar screen before Emma glowed with the bright returns of 6 aircraft approaching fast, 2 tight formations of 3, their flight paths steady, their intent unmistakable. Sky Ghost to Tower, I have 6 unidentified contacts, distance 50 miles, closing fast. These are not friendlies, she reported, her voice calm, though her pulse beat hard in her ears. On the ground, General Hayes felt the weight of her words in the tower. The radar operators exchanged worried glances. There had been no scheduled joint exercise, no allied squadron in the area. The intruders were real, and they were coming. Emma adjusted the radar filters, narrowing the scan. Just as her father had taught her in long hours at dusty airfields, she read the signatures as if they were handwriting, not Navy birds, possibly foreign-built and heavily modified, maintaining combat formation and radio silence recommendation treat as hostile. There was no hesitation in her own mind. The moment for proving herself was here, and it would be written in the sky for all to see. She eased the throttle and climbed another 5,000 feet, using the Raptor stealth to vanish from their instruments, the sun's glare behind her, turning the jet into a ghost. At 45,000 feet, she had the advantage. She chose her first target, the lead aircraft of the nearest formation. Her father's voice echoed in memory. The best strike is the one they never see coming. Emma rolled the Raptor into a shallow dive, aligning the nose perfectly on target. Her thumb pressed the control. A bright icon flashed on the heads-up display. Missile away, Fox 3. The AMRAAM streaked from its rail, vanishing into the blue. A second later, her display confirmed a direct hit. Splash 1. Below her, the enemy formation broke apart, the remaining 5 jets scattering their neat geometry, dissolving into frantic angles. They now knew they faced something deadly. In the tower, Captain Morgan's voice was barely above a whisper. She actually did it. Emma didn't hear. She was already pivoting the jet, climbing sharply to set up for another run. 2 of the hostile aircraft had swung behind her, closing from the rear. Sky Ghost, you have 2 bogeys on your 6th, the radar operator warned. Copy, Tower. I see them, she replied, her eyes narrowing. Dad always said never run unless you're running at them. She yanked the Raptor into a brutal high G, turned the horizon, spinning in a blur. The maneuver slammed her into the seat, her body protesting, but the enemy jets flashed past in her crosshairs. A quick lock tone, Fox 3 Splash 2. The battle became a dance of speed and precision, contrails arcing through the sky like white scars. The Raptor's thrust vectoring nozzles let her pivot and climb in ways most pilots couldn't dream of. The third kill came with a missile. The fourth, with the Raptor's internal cannon, a short burst, and the target shattered into pieces that fell like burning confetti through the thin air. From the tower, Hayes watched with eyes wide, his disbelief warring with awe. She was flying like a predator, every move planned, 2 steps ahead. Sky Ghost Tower 2, remaining contacts breaking for the base. Copy tower moving to intercept, she replied, shoving the throttle forward. The last two enemy aircraft were making a straight run for Fort Ridge, hoping to strike something vital before they were destroyed. They never saw her closing from low altitude, masked by the terrain, until it was too late. She climbed up behind them in the final seconds, both missiles away, Fox 3 splash 5, and 6 targets eliminated. For a moment, the comms were quiet, the roar of her engines the only sound in her headset. Then Master Sergeant Clark's voice came through, filled with something between pride and wonder. Sky Ghost Base is secure. You may return for landing. Copy tower inbound, she said, and after a pause, tell the general his coffee is getting cold. Emma leveled a Raptor and banked gently toward home, the desert unfolding below her, the adrenaline still burning in her veins. She had done what no one thought possible, and she had done it in front of the very people who had dismissed her for years. The Raptor descended in a smooth arc, the desert floor rising slowly to meet it. Emma kept her hands steady on the controls, easing the power back, the airspeed dropping in perfect sequence. She had landed hundreds of times in trainers and smaller jets, but bringing the F-22 down after a real combat mission carried a weight unlike any other. The runway stretched ahead like a ribbon of black against the pale sand, the sunlight flashing across the canopy. As she lowered the landing gear, 3 green lights on the panel confirming the lock. The wheels touched the tarmac with a sound more felt than heard. The air brake deployed, the jet slowing in a steady, controlled roll. 20 minutes after she had left, she taxied back toward the hangars, the same path she had walked earlier, in a flight suit that no one thought she deserved. Now, every eye on the base was on her. Pilots, ground crew, security personnel, even administrative staff had come out to the tarmac. The line of faces grew thicker as she neared the stopping point. The canopy lifted and the hot desert air rushed in. Emma pulled off her helmet, her hair damp from the heat. Inside the suit, her pulse still carrying the echo of combat. She stood in the cockpit for a moment, taking in the sight of the crowd. At the front of it, General Hayes walked slowly toward the aircraft, his pace measured, his face pale, his eyes fixed on her. He stopped at the foot of the ladder, looking up as she stepped down each rung. When she reached the ground, he removed his cap in a deliberate gesture that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. For the first time in his 30-year career, Robert Hayes saluted someone not because of rank or regulation, but because of what he had just witnessed. He held the salute for a long moment, the weight of it visible in his posture. When he spoke, his voice carried across the tarmac. Emma Carter, I owe you an apology. I owe this base an apology, and I owe the memory of your father the respect it should have had from the beginning. Emma met his gaze, her breathing steady. General, all I ever wanted was the chance to serve just like my father taught me. Hayes turned to the assembled personnel, his voice rising. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the newest pilot of the 421st Fighter Squadron, Captain Emma Carter, effective immediately. The announcement was met with an eruption of cheers, the kind that rolled across the flight line like a wave. Mechanics clapped each other on the back, pilots whistled, the air filled with the sound of approval. Emma raised a hand, the noise gradually falling away. Before I accept this, I need to know something. Will I be judged by my performance in that cockpit, or by the assumptions you made when I was serving coffee? Hayes nodded, once a brief but certain motion. Captain Carter, after what I witnessed today, you will be judged as one of the finest pilots I have ever seen. The crowd broke into fresh applause, the sound less about celebration and more about recognition. The invisible assistant had become the defender of the base. The coffee girl was now the pilot who had turned the tide in a battle they had not been prepared to fight. Emma glanced toward the hangar, where her Raptor was being guided into position by the ground crew. She felt no need to say anything more. The sky had spoken for her. 3 months later, the desert sun still rose over Fort Ridge in the same unhurried way, casting long gold lines over the runways, but the air on the base felt different. The change was subtle at first, in the way conversations paused when Emma Carter entered a room, in the way new recruits looked at her, with something between curiosity and respect. In the way even General Hayes now asked for her input during planning sessions. Emma had been promoted to flight instructor, her specialty air-to-air combat tactics, the same skill set that had saved the base that day. She spent her mornings in the simulator rooms and her afternoons in the sky, the cockpit of the Raptor, once denied to her now, as familiar as her own shadow each time she stepped inside. She felt the quiet pride of knowing she had claimed her place through action, not permission. The sign that once hung in Hayes' office was gone. The one that read "Real pilots don't need GPS" had been replaced by a simple message: "Real pilots prove themselves in the sky, not in the briefing room." It was not just a motto, it was an acknowledgement that the culture had shifted, even if only slightly. Her fellow instructors sometimes asked her about that November morning, what it felt like to face 6 hostile aircraft alone, how she kept her voice steady over the comms, how she made decisions so quickly. She always gave the same answer: "You don't think about the odds, you just think about the next move." Off duty, she still walked the same hallways where she once carried coffee and paperwork, but now the nods she received were different, not the polite half-recognition of someone barely noticed, but the acknowledgement of an equal. She never flaunted her position, never reminded anyone of what she had done. Those who had been there needed no reminding, and those who had not would hear the story soon enough. One afternoon, while watching a group of young pilots run through a pre-flight checklist, she found herself remembering the afternoons at the small airfield where her father had stood beside her, pointing out the feel of the wind across the wings, the subtle shift in the controls. When a plane wanted to climb, rather than dive, his voice was always steady, never doubting her, even when the rest of the world thought she was chasing the wrong dream. Sometimes she thought about how close things had come to ending differently if she had stayed silent. If she had believed the dismissals and the smirks, the base would have been vulnerable, and the lesson would have been lost. Instead, that day had become proof that talent does not wait for an invitation. It arrives fully formed when it is needed most. She also knew that somewhere there was another person in another uniform, or maybe without one, who was being underestimated simply because they did not fit the picture in someone else's head, and she hoped that when their moment came, they would not hesitate. The morning schedule at the base had not changed. 600 hours mint coffee was waiting for the pilots, but now it was served by those who had flown real missions, men and women who knew the weight of the helmet and the hum of engines ready for takeoff. They poured coffee not because it was their only duty, but because it was a reminder that no role on a base is too small to hide a hero. Emma sometimes caught new arrivals staring at a Raptor on the tarmac, the sleek gray aircraft gleaming in the sun, its call sign sky ghost painted just below the canopy. She would smile and tell them the jet was only as good as the pilot, and the pilot only as good as the people who believed in them. She never forgot the look on Hayes' face that first moment when the realization hit the coffee girl was the most skilled pilot on his base, and she carried that memory like a badge, not out of pride, but as a reminder that the people we overlook are often the ones who can change everything. In the end, the story of that day spread far beyond Fort Ridge. It moved through the ranks and across airfields, told in ready rooms and training sessions. It was not just a story about a woman flying a jet. It was a story about breaking the lock on a door that should never have been closed. And whenever she was asked why she stepped forward that day, Emma Carter would simply say the same words her father once told her: "When the sky calls you, answer, and you never ask if you are allowed."